Thanks for coming out tonight. My name is Brett Shepard. I direct the creative writing program here at the University of Idaho. Alison Hawthorne Deming will be sharing her poems and nonfiction with us tonight. She's been here all week as one of our distinguished visiting writers. And it's been wonderful to have her here. She's been generous and so much fun to spend time with. So it's great to have her in Moscow. Just a few announcements before I introduce Scott Slovic. After the reading, we will do a Q&A, so Alison will be up here answering questions. So as the reading goes along and a question comes to mind, store it away and we will get to those afterwards. And Alison will also be signing copies of her book after the reading out there as well. So please stop by, say hi to her, and have her sign your book. We have some readings coming up after this. At the end of this month, Robert Michael Pyle will be here. March 31st for an ecological literary evening. This is in conjunction with Washington State University's English department, and we're thrilled to be collaborating with them. Also, Matt Bell, a fiction writer, will be in Moscow as a distinguished visiting writer, April 13th to the 17th, just like Alison is this week, all week long, which is great. Another very special reading coming up on April 23rd. One of our own professors of poetry and English, Alexandra Teague, who's here tonight, has a new book of poems coming out, and she'll be reading at Book People to celebrate the book, so we hope to see you all there as well. Also, if you don't already like the University of Idaho's MFA creative writing page on Facebook, please do that. All of our events get posted there. Please silence your phones, computers, and any other technology. We'd appreciate it. And now to the reading. To introduce Alison, I'd like to bring up one of Idaho's own really fantastic writers and scholars, and he's also the chair of the English department as well. Please help me welcome Scott Slovic.
Thanks, Brett, and thanks to all of you for being here this evening. And Brett, you went through a series of events associated with the creative writing program in the department, but of course also Alison Deming's visit as a distinguished visiting writer this week is in conjunction with our Hemingway Festival. So of course, before the other readings that Brett just mentioned, we also have Violet Buluwayo reading here, same place, same time, tomorrow evening. So please do join us again for that event. So Alison Hawthorne Deming is with us this week as our distinguished visiting writer representing the genre of nonfiction. Those of you who aren't normally involved in the MFA program may not be entirely aware that we bring in 3 distinguished visiting writers each year representing poetry, nonfiction, and fiction. And so Alison is wearing one of her literary hats this week as a nonfiction writer. I think many of you are probably aware of Alison's literary accomplishments, her 4 powerful books of nonfiction, Temporary Homelands, The Edges of the Civilized World, Writing the Sacred into the Real, and her beautiful new book, Zoologies, on Animals and the Human Spirit, from which she'll be reading this evening. And many of you will also be familiar with some or all of her poetry collections, such as Science and Other Poems, The Monarchs, Genius Loci, and Rope. Or you may have read various individual essays or poems of hers in a wide range of journals, magazines, and anthologies over the past 2 decades. But I suspect that most readers of Alison's eloquent and profound words are less familiar with her parallel life as an extremely practical-minded and accomplished arts administrator, a dimension of her life that I find to be crucially linked to the kind of writing she does. Alison, who is currently the Agnes Nelms-Howry Professor of Environment and Social Justice in the Creative Writing Program at the University of Arizona, worked as writing program coordinator at the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown, Massachusetts for 2 years before becoming director of the University of Arizona Poetry Center in 1990, a position she held until 2002. More recently, I worked closely with her when she took over in 2012 as chair of the board of directors of Orion magazine, succeeding the founder of the magazine, who had overseen his organization for 30 years, and guiding this prominent publication into its new post-founder existence with down-to-earth vision. As I have attempted to capture in the portrait of Alison that I wrote for her 2001 book, Writing the Sacred into the Real, which appeared in Milkweed Editions' Credo series, there's a visceral sense of pragmatism and activism in Alison's writing, a sense that writing and the other arts have serious work to do in the world in helping us to grapple with the meaning of our lives and with the environmental and social concerns that preoccupy us. One of the most arresting passages I can recall in Alison's work is the chapter titled Poemoho, From Writing the Sacred into the Real, where she's hiking on a steep mountain trail in Hawaii with another woman when her companion suddenly falls headfirst over the edge of a fern-covered cliff before catching herself in the ferns and scrub about 20 feet below the lip of the cliff. Rather than merely staring in shock or crying out for help, Alison immediately lowers a tree branch to her companion, planning to secure the fallen hiker until other help can arrive. Alison writes, "I kneeled on the trail, braced a knee against a slight mound of protruding rock, surely not enough resistance to hold me, but it did, as I centered my body's gravity over the earth rather than the chasm." End quote. Well, this is exactly what Alison's writing does, it seems to me. Her words help us to recognize the world's tragedies and beauties, its lost and threatened individuals and species. Her words secure us in this world and facilitate the solving of problems, even as they guide us through the contemplation of mystery. In making her poetry and her prose, she does indeed write the sacred into the real. Please welcome Alison Deming.
Thank you so much, Scott, and thanks to everybody here in this town. It's been such a fun visit. You've all been so hospitable, and even made it get a little bit chilly, so I could feel what Idaho, I think, is supposed to feel like in the winter. But I'm very grateful to everybody's generosity, and particularly that amazing feast for many of you. I know were there. So I'm going to read last night, the Hemingway Feastathon. I encourage you all to do that next year if they have this event again, which I think they probably will. So I'm going to read tonight, I think, 3 poems from a new collection that's coming out, and then I'm going to read mostly from Zoologies. This new book is called Stairway to Heaven, and it, I guess, in some ways is a poetic way to refute some of the current books about everybody getting to heaven for a few minutes and then coming back to tell us what it's like. Pop psych books. You know, I was just, oh, I'm glad you got to come back, but my guess is that probably isn't heaven. Where you were in the hospital when it happened. Anyway, there is a poem in the book by that title that rips on the Led Zeppelin tune, but I'm going to read a poem entitled Primordial Soup. The idea came to me in the kitchen while I was cutting cilantro for the black beans, and my friend and I were talking while the sea outside remained the sea, holding its mysteries in the dark, tempting us with its surface dazzle. The idea came as if a theory of war I'd been working on, though in truth it just bubbled up like the first disturbance in a pot that means the soup is about to boil. Is there something in us? I asked him, my friend who was waving the celery tops at me and asking with his eyes if they belonged in the soup, and I was saying yes with my eyebrows, while asking, is there something in us? And by us, I didn't mean the man and woman feeling the man and woman thing while cooking together in the kitchen by the sea, where the wind carried salt into our every breath, making us savor breathing. But I meant our animal selves, our mysteries in the dark of mind and body. Is there something in us, that old animal us, that doesn't feel balanced without the threat of dangerous animals? The African brain of us, the sinew and blood longing for the bond between predator and prey that we tossed with the entrails of farm-raised salmon and beef. Mine was an amateur theory of war, that we wage it, not our kind, it's fine to kill them, mindless of the mechanism ticking and cranking and blowing up beneath the surface inside us. We don't even know what we're doing when we do it. What lesson in being human did we not first learn from the animals? The cheetah was the first domestic cat. In ancient Egypt, the keepers asked, as we ask, can we please make the violent lie down and go to sleep, and when it wakes, to lap calmly from the saucer? And then, the something that was in us was soup, a liquor that had blown from the sea right into our bowls. I thought it would be nice to read a couple of North Country poems, since I'm in North Country. They're different North Country. They're the North Country of New Brunswick, the Canadian border between Maine and New Brunswick. I've never read this poem before, so hopefully this will be a good test of its oral promise. The International Motel. He wanted to talk, the man from Fish and Game, who had taken time after 12 hours on the road to observe two bald eagles nesting at the Moosehorn Refuge, where at dawn he would begin 5 days in the woods, 5 days of fire training. How do they teach you? Set a fire in the woods and make you put it out? Yeah, he said, eventually. We sipped beers on the veranda while the river bled pink and silver, glassy smears that marked how the inflowing tide disrupted the water's seaward pull. A German couple joined us. They were making a square dance tour of America, following the guidebook that told them, state by state, each community, where they could find others who knew the promenade and do-si-do, moves shaped in a pastoral life, then sampled by urban dwellers. Maybe the first pastoralists played at being hunter-gatherers, spear becoming javelin, sledge becoming sled. They showed us their costumes, cowboy shirt, color of orange popsicles, tiered floral dress, puffy and perfect as a doll's bouffant. The St. Croix went on bleeding in its quiet profusion, and I excused myself to walk along its bank. Two boys were fishing, perched on a rock, casting lines into the near dark. They left when they saw me coming, and I was sorry. The river threw the soft night back up to the sky, pink bouncing off the surface, as if water and air were dance partners, pink like a bog orchid, something brief that startles the mind, grown accustomed to the browns and mists of the north. As many of you know, Seamus Heaney passed last year. Was it last year? One of the great poets of our time and continuing the great bard tradition of Ireland. And so if you know Heaney's work well, you'll hear echoes of one of his poems in this. Many of the moves from stanza to stanza are sort of theft from Seamus Heaney. But this island is set up, this poem is set on an island I visited in the Bay of Fundy that's a commercial fishing island. And commercial fishing is the highest risk profession in the world, has the most deaths of any job in the world. So this poem is written in honor and respect for the people who do that work, which are many of my neighbors where I spent the summers up there. The Drowned Man. Some week when the roof leaks and the cat has been carried off by the fox. When my brother's scans sparkle with lesions, when someone hates me for the good deed I've done, and it's impossible to sleep or wake, I will return to the island to see its blue and lavender rocks. I will stare at the ocean a long time, thinking of the man lost at sea, who clung to a sheet of plywood after his fishing boat went down. His jeans so heavy with water, his hands so cold with cold, that he had to let go and go down. Trove of the fishers lost to the deep, the holy seabed scattered with wrecks, nothing but bones and boots laid out on the scuttle ground after the benthic gleaners have gone. The sad nets coming up empty, laden with such loss that his people can only shake their heads and gear up for another day of work. Something of their faith may come to me if I stare all day at the churn and pull of fearsome tides, the tweeded surface of the bay. I'll know what I suffered is small on the scale of what people are made to live through. A net of words holds a place together, and those who are broken are lifted home. Essays, I think, all looking at the question of what animals mean to human beings and what they've meant to us from the earliest times. And so it has a sort of a chronological arc to it. And I began the book, well, out of several things. One was a student who was in one of my undergraduate classes. I was talking about the extinction crisis and lamenting it and speaking about how great and radical that loss was to us, I thought. And he got crankier and crankier as I raved on. And at some point, he shot his hands up and said, "Why should I care about this? What does this have to do with me? I just want to get out of here and get a job." And I, one of those professorial moments when you're speechless, which doesn't come that often. And I thought, well, there are probably 200 or 300 pages that I could write that might answer that question. And that's what this book is. I attempt to answer it. And the other initiating image is a carving that I'm going to read about now. A tiny little cormorant. A cormorant, the size of a human thumb, has been found in the Holyfels cave in Germany's Swabian Alps. One of 3 figurines carved from mammoth ivory, the find provides the earliest evidence that our human ancestors made figurative art more than 30,000 years ago, the period during which bison, mammoth, and lion images began to transform European caves into shrines. All 3 carvings in the recently discovered cache depict animals, one horse's head, one half lion, half human creature, and one bird with body and neck extended into the graceful tension of a cormorant rising towards water's surface after a feasting dive, rising from the invisible underwater world into the air. The beauty of animals called these ancestors to acts of creation. The figures, which do not appear to be the work of amateurs, though they may be among the earliest artworks made by human beings, are polished from constant handling, as one might rub a beach stone or hardened burl, letting the oil of one's fingers raise the object's sheen, while the thumb's repetitive motion against that smoothness leads the mind to that clean place one comes to when staring into space and thinking. Rather than being savages, our forebears were sculptors, painters, and contemplators, their minds, like ours, in a daydream. As long as we've been human, we've been making art. Or perhaps it is more accurate to place this eagerness to participate in creation at the center of what it is to be the animal we are. As long as we've been making art, we've been human. Art from the primal world draws the imagination back into the unthinkably deep well of time it took for the human mind as we know it to evolve. We may have been around as tool makers, language users, dietary omnivores, cosmological celebrants, nomadic socializers, and combatants for 500,000 to 2 million years, depending what markers you use to start measuring proto-humanity. But it is not until 40,000 to 100,000 years ago that fossil forms look indistinguishable from those of modern human beings. And as we dig up more and more of the last remote places on Earth, looking for the bones that will teach us the nature of what we are, we keep turning up art and asking, what does it mean? It means what it is. Mammoth tusk, transformed into water bird by a creature who, seeing the beauty and mystery of the bird, was moved to hold it in mind and hand, to become intimate with the bird, and so carved a likeness that would preserve and keep it close. And so begins the long human braiding of art, nature, and the idea of the transcendent. The bird transcends the limits of its birdness by flying through water, and the carving transcends the circumstance of the human encounter with the water bird, prolonging the interaction for as long as the hand and mind desire, and providing the opportunity to share it with others. Our deepest human memory, one so deep we cannot see the shape of it on the surface of our thinking, may be our capacity to read and preserve and share our encounters with animals. Early humans may have learned this capacity in surviving the threat of predators, but we get to carry it forward as an acuity to animal beauty that gives meaning to our lives. So during the time I was working on this book, I had the good fortune to be one of the 5 or 6 poets in the country that were assigned to create poetry installations in zoos around the country. And it was a project run by Poets House out of New York to see if poetry, a lot of people go to zoos, they're really sick of the data about extinctions, and it's very depressing to go there. And sometimes, although the science is of tremendous value, there are other experiences that people might like to see reflected in the interpretive materials. So we put up these poetry installations in zoos and did some evaluation. It turned out that the statements reflecting increased conservation values increased very dramatically after the poems went up in the zoos. So it was pretty cool. Now we're going to be doing that in some science museums around the country. So I want to read you a short anecdote about one of those installations. It comes at the end of a long and very depressing essay about elephants, and I promise you I'm not going to read the long and very depressing part, because we want to have a good time tonight, and you can read it on your own, but you know the fate of, in the privacy of your weeping chamber, you know the fate of the elephants, and particularly in Africa where they're being hunted for their ivory, and that ivory is often supporting civil wars and other forms of violence, and those elephants are suffering for something very like post-traumatic stress syndrome that our military veterans can suffer from. So there's a lot of the chapter deals with that. But this little section that I'll read deals with a visit I made to the Little Rock Zoo to tour their exhibits, and I had the great privilege to meet a couple of Asian elephants. And I will never forget it. I'm honored to say I met 2 elephants at the Little Rock Zoo. I was touring the poetry installations and enjoying the behind-the-scenes talk of educators and keepers that had become such a lovely part of my experience on the project. My favorite keeper story from another zoo was one about an orangutan that escaped his enclosure. He was so accustomed to human behavior that when he got out, he just stood around on the sidewalk, putting his arm around people and posing for photographs. Would you like to meet the elephants? My little rock host asked. Sure, I replied, not knowing what to expect. We entered the night quarters, an empty, cement-floored barn with airy compartments lined with huge steel bars. A car-sized, cylindrical, red-bristled brush had been mounted vertically on one of the bars, the brush from a street sweeper, repurposed as an elephant back-scratcher. The keeper was hosing down the floor and steel pillars. Sorry, he said, it really stinks in here today. He just completed the weekly bleaching, so the place smelled like a swimming pool. No elephants in sight. Can she meet the girls? Keeper was a tall, quiet, wiry man with white hair, wire glasses, khaki pants, and shirt. When he heard I was from Arizona, he told me he was a hiker, and we talked about our favorite sights. He led us out through the barn-sized doorway to the dusty yard. The two elephants were at the far end of the yard, under a spot of shade, lazing. He called them over. What did he say? Move on or move along, something like that. He said it quietly. Their heads lifted, and they joined us, two Asian elephants, walking over like slow golden retrievers at the sound of his voice. And there we stood, 3 people, flanked by 2 elephants, just hanging out like a bunch of farmhands, talking in the outdoors. I stroked their creased leather trunks and knobby brows. One snuffed at my sneaker with its nostrils. The 2 pink hollows at the tip of the trunk opening into the warm, wet mystery of the beast's interior. I stood face to face with one of them, the elephant's eyelashes long as my thumb, black, shiny, fine. Her trunk was pink with gray freckles, the skin dry leather, the eyes balmy and deep. I was surprised by the toenails, the feet so stump-like. Do their toenails need care? They get a pedicure every 2 weeks. Most elephants that die in captivity gets from infections in the foot that spread to the body. They have bowling pins. One elephant has learned to bowl. They have beer kegs to toss. They have a huge black ball to roll. It's something that's used to blow through an oil pipeline to clean it. It's only used once, costs $8,000, subsidized fossil fuel industry at work, costs $8,000, then is donated here for elephant enrichment. The keeper tells me they're so smart, it's hard to keep them interested. He's always looking for a new toy or task. He hides fruit for them to find, builds a basket up high in the enclosure, so they have to work for food. One has a thick scar on her rear ankle. What's her story? They had found a packing slip in her crate when she arrived. She had been a circus elephant, shipped to New York City in 1951. She must have been kept chained in her crate when she wasn't in the circus ring. When she got here to Little Rock, she was afraid of everything. The little kids' zoo train, the peacocks. The other elephant had been purchased from a logging camp in India, where she'd been employed. The circus elephant was 61 years old, the laborer a few years younger. Their whole lives were spent in human company, and this was the kindest chapter. Each morning before the zoo opens, they get to take a walk through the whole place. A purist would want them to be free of the barn, the dusty paddock, the steel bars, and yet these elephants have lived interesting and difficult lives. Zoo people like to refer to their animals as ambassadors from the wild. These 2 are more like refugees. Do they understand a lot of words? About 100. They nudge forward, but ever so gently. They want to go inside for water. They inch forward, never shove. What kindness has come to them has made them calm and patient. I felt that somehow they knew what I was saying with my hands, which stroked and stroked them while we talked. What do you think about elephant emotions? I asked him. You know, how people say they have such feelings of affection and grief. They know right away what you feel, said the keeper. A man who knows these two individuals as well as I know any of my friends. Humans used to be that way, but we lost it.